Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. We've got a pretty interesting set of sources on the Netherlands between 1948 and 1978.
Yeah, a really fascinating period.
Lesson plans, historical summaries, even some personal stories.
It's amazing how much change can get packed into just a few decades.
Seriously. And it seems like it's way more dramatic than just windmills and tulips, right? We're talking about decades that totally transformed Dutch society.
Absolutely. And what's so interesting is that this period picks up right after World War II. You know,
Oh yeah, rebuilding from the ground up.
literally.
And we've even got this image of Nijmegen in ruins to really drive that home.
It's a powerful reminder of what they were dealing with.
It's 1945, most of Europe's in shambles, so what's the initial mood like in the Netherlands? Trying to go back to normal, I imagine.
There's definitely that urge to return to familiar structures.
Like what kinds of structures?
Well, you see it with the Versailles system.
Italy.
Yeah, those separate Catholic, Protestant, socialist communities, each with their own schools, newspapers.
Like parallel societies almost.
Yeah, exactly. But then the Cold War throws a massive wrench into things.
Okay, so how does the Cold War actually impact the average person in the Netherlands? It's not like they've got tanks rolling through the streets, right?
No, not quite. But think about it. The Netherlands aligns with the U.S. and Western Europe, receives Marshall aid.
That's huge for rebuilding.
Huge. And the economy starts booming.
Okay,
But this also means living with that constant threat of nuclear war, right? That ideological battle between communism and capitalism, it's always simmering in the background.
shaping daily life.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
shapes policy decisions, cultural trends, even just that underlying anxiety of the times.
That's wild. So we go from rebuilding to this economic miracle, and a term pops up in the sources. Tintje van Leeftink, Leeftink's tenor.
Ah.
What's the deal with that?
Well, imagine this. 1945, Finance Minister Liefdink basically slashes the value of the Dutch guilder by 90%.
Wow.
Everyone trades in their old 10 guilder notes for just one new one.
Talk about an economic shock.
It was a bold move.
Did people just accept that?
I mean, there was definitely pushback, but this drastic step helped curb runaway inflation and paved the way for a more stable economy.
Okay, I see. So it's like a reset button almost.
Yeah, you could say that.
Hmm.
And from there, we see the emergence of the welfare state, a huge shift.
Right, we've got these terms, Nachtwacherstaat, the night watchman state versus the Verzorging state, the welfare state.
Right.
It's more than just a name change, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole new social contract. Prime Minister Willem Dries, affectionately known as Vadertje Dries, Father Dries,
Ah,
he champions this geleid loon politic, a guided wage policy.
hold on, guided wages. What does that even mean?
Think of it like this. The government gently encourages a balance between wages and prices to help boost industries and exports.
It sounds tricky.
It's a delicate dance.
So wages are kept in check.
In a way, yes.
But on the flip side, the government steps up with social programs, healthcare pensions, stuff that wasn't there before.
Exactly. The AOW, the General Old Age Pensions Act, that's a landmark moment in 1957. And then there's that iconic image, Trekken van Dries, Dries pulling power,
Pulling power.
symbolizing his ability to lead the nation towards this new social contract.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then boom, the Netherlands discovers natural gas in Groningen.
It's like winning the lottery.
It really was.
Okay, so now we've got economic recovery, a safety net in the welfare state, and suddenly huge natural gas reserves. It's like everything's coming up roses for the Netherlands.
It's a remarkable turnaround.
But something tells me it can't stay that rosy forever.
You're picking up on those subtle hints in your source's good eye.
I'm trying.
While the 50s feel like a time of unity and progress, the seeds of change are already being sown.
Oh,
And things are about to get a whole lot more complicated.
that's where we'll pick up in part 2.
It really is remarkable how much changed in just a few years.
Mm.
But those hints of change you mentioned, they're about to become impossible to ignore. Remember how we talked about Prime Minister Dries' guided wage policy?
Yeah, keeping things balanced.
Right. Well, under his successor, Jan de Quay, that policy gets tossed out the window.
Okay, so no more gentle guidance of wages. What happens then?
Well, you could say things got a little wild.
Oh,
Wages shoot up, and suddenly the Netherlands has a taste of that post-war consumer boom sweeping the Western world. Think appliances, vacations abroad.
ours becoming commonplace.
Exactly. It's a whole new level of material prosperity.
Yeah, I bet. It's like that keeping up with the Joneses mentality kicks in. Everyone wants the latest gadgets, the newest car. But how does that consumerism square with the whole welfare state idea? Aren't those kind of at odds?
It's a tension that starts to emerge. On one hand, you have this newfound individual prosperity, this embrace of material goods and leisure time.
Right.
On the other hand, there's the question of whether everyone benefits equally from this economic boom.
Makes sense.
And if the welfare state, meant to provide a safety net, is actually keeping pace with these rapid changes.
Right, because even if everyone's getting richer, the gap between the haves and have-nots could still be widening. And it seems like Dutch society itself is changing rapidly alongside the economy. In your sources, youth culture really explodes in this era.
It does. It's not just economics, it's values, attitudes, the whole generation gap thing playing out.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You've got Radio Veronica, this pirate station broadcasting pop music from international waters,
Oh, wow.
driving the older generation crazy,
I can imagine.
but becoming a cultural phenomenon for young people.
Yeah.
Then there's D66, a new political party attracting those younger voters, demanding change and more say in how things are run.
It sounds almost like a mini rebellion, rejecting the stuffy old ways. Was there a particular style or look that defined this new youth culture?
Oh, definitely. Think leather jackets, greased hair, James Dean, and rock and roll the nosums, as they were called.
Nosums.
They were seen as delinquents by some, but they represented this wave of youthful energy, challenging the status quo, pushing back against their parents' generation.
So you've got this exciting new consumer society, but also pushback from these rebellious teenagers and, as your sources point out, from the counterculture movements brewing at the same time.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? Alongside the excitement of consumerism, you have the Provo movement, these anarchist artists staging provocative protests,
Yay.
and of course the hippies questioning materialism, authority, the whole system. They're demanding a different future, one focused on peace, environmentalism, social justice.
So we've got this economic boom rocking the boat, youth culture shaking things up, and these counterculture movements questioning everything. Were there any specific events that really brought these tensions to the surface?
Well, on the social front, there's a landmark year,
Oh, yeah.
1956.
56.
That's when married women in the Netherlands finally gain legal capacity.
Oh, wow.
Up until then, they couldn't even open a bank account without their husband's permission.
Seriously?
It's a huge step forward, but it sparks a much bigger conversation about women's roles in society.
It sounds like that legal change was just the tip of the iceberg. What happens next?
The floodgates open. Second-wave feminism takes root in the Netherlands. Groups like Man-Vrouw Maatschappij, Man-Woman Society are advocating for equal rights and opportunities across the board.
Oh.
Then there's the more radical Dalai known for their bold protests and stunts, demanding everything from equal pay to access to childcare and reproductive rights. They're not afraid to make noise and push the boundaries.
And what about the impact of the contraceptive pill? That must have been a game changer for women's lives, right?
Absolutely. The pill gives women more control over their bodies and their choices, which has ripple effects across society. We also see changes in divorce laws, more women entering higher education. It's a slow but steady dismantling of those traditional gender roles.
It's amazing to see how much change is packed into these few decades.
Yeah.
But alongside all this internal upheaval, the world stage is also shifting dramatically. Decolonization is happening on a global scale, and the Netherlands is right in the middle of it.
It's a pivotal moment in world history, and it has a profound impact on the Netherlands. The Indonesian War of Independence from 1946 to 1949 is particularly difficult.
You mentioned some terms in your notes, politionele acties, police actions.
Right.
That doesn't sound like a full-blown war.
That's how the Dutch government tried to frame it, but it was a brutal conflict, and it left deep scars on both sides.
I see.
There's this phrase that captures the sentiment at the time. Indonesië verloren, rampspoed geboren. Indonesia lost, disaster born. It speaks to the sense of national loss, the crumbling of a world order.
Wow, that's heavy stuff.
Uh,
And then Suriname gains independence in 1975. What's the feeling around that? Relief, more sadness.
It's complicated. Some see it as a necessary step towards justice, while others mourn the loss of this colonial tie, this piece of their history. And it's not just about losing territories on a map. It's about how Dutch identity is being redefined as its colonial past comes under scrutiny.
So we've got all this internal change, the world stage shifting, and now you've got people on the move, both within the Netherlands and coming from elsewhere. The sources you gave me mentioned several waves of migration happening during these decades.
Exactly. In the 50s, you have Dutch people themselves emigrating to Canada, Australia, New Zealand.
Wow.
Some seeking new opportunities, others perhaps trying to escape the memories of war. At the same time, Indonesians are arriving in the Netherlands, some forced to leave, others choosing to build a new life in the former colonizer's country.
It's almost like this mirroring effect. People leaving and arriving, this exchange of cultures and experiences. And then the 60s bring another wave of migration, right?
That's when the gastarbeiters arrive, guest workers, mainly from Southern Europe, Turkey, and Morocco.
Okay.
They're brought in to fill labor shortages, but many end up staying, putting down roots, adding to the cultural tapestry of the Netherlands.
Hmm.
And then in the 70s, you see an influx of immigrants from Suriname and the Antilles, further diversifying Dutch society.
So the Netherlands is becoming more multicultural, more pluralistic. It seems like this era lays the groundwork for the kind of society we see in the Netherlands today. But something tells me this story doesn't have a completely happy ending. Those hints of trouble we talked about earlier.
You're right to sense that shift. The economic boom can't last forever. In 1973, the oil crisis hits, and while the Netherlands initially weathers the storm, by 1980, the economic party is definitely over.
So all that prosperity, all that growth, it starts to unravel. What does that mean for Dutch society?
It puts immense pressure on the welfare state. The very foundation of that social contract is suddenly in question. And it sets the stage for the challenges and debates that will come to define the next chapter in Dutch history.
Wow, it's amazing how all these pieces fit together.
It is, and it really highlights how those few decades had such a lasting impact.
Right, we've gone from rebuilding after the war to an economic boom and all this social and cultural change, and now this looming economic crisis. It's a lot to process.
It really is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what stands out to you as some of the most significant long-lasting changes?
Well, I think one of the most profound shifts is that transition from a traditional pillarized society to a more individualized and secular one.
Right, like we talked about with the Verzuiling system.
Exactly. Those separate communities based on religion and ideology, those lines start to blur, and individual freedom gains prominence.
Like the Netherlands is catching up with the rest of the Western world, right?
It is. And it's not just about mirroring trends. It's about the Netherlands becoming more integrated into that globalized world, both economically and culturally.
But that brings new challenges too, right?
Of course, how do you balance this newfound individual freedom with a sense of collective responsibility? How do you manage a more diverse society with different values and beliefs while maintaining a sense of national unity?
That's a great point.
Mhm.
And were there any downsides to all these changes? Things that maybe weren't so obvious at the time?
One potential downside is what we just touched on, that erosion of traditional communities and social structures.
With the decline of the Verzuiling system.
Yeah. While it opened doors for individual freedom and social mobility, it also led to a sense of fragmentation for some loss of belonging.
It's like you trade one set of challenges for another.
Exactly. You break free from the old constraints, but then you have to figure out how to build new connections, new communities in this rapidly changing world.
And that challenge of building new connections in a more diverse society is definitely still relevant today.
Absolutely.
And then there's the whole issue of decolonization.
Right.
How did that impact the Dutch sense of themselves, their national identity?
It's a complex issue. It wasn't just about losing territories. It was about confronting a past that had often been romanticized or ignored.
And coming to terms with that.
Yeah. The arrival of immigrants from former colonies forced the Netherlands to grapple with its colonial legacy, acknowledge the injustices of the past, and figure out how to build a more inclusive society in the present.
Those are really tough conversations to have.
They are, but they're essential.
And then, of course, there's the question of the welfare state. It seemed like such a symbol of progress. But then that economic crisis in the late 70s put it under pressure.
It did. It led to some tough choices and some difficult debates. The idea of a comprehensive welfare state providing a safety net for everyone came under scrutiny.
It sounds like there were a lot of different opinions on how to move forward.
There were questions about its affordability, its sustainability, and even its impact on individual initiative.
So it wasn't just about economics. It was about different visions of society.
Different ideas about the role of government, of individual responsibility versus collective support.
And those debates are still going on today.
They are. How do you balance the need for a strong social safety net with the realities of a globalized economy? How do you ensure that everyone has opportunities to succeed while also promoting personal responsibility?
So many big questions.
And they're not easy to answer?
Well, we've covered so much in our deep dive today. It's incredible how much ground we've covered.
We have.
From post-war rebuilding and Cold War anxieties to the economic miracle and the welfare state, the rise of consumerism and counterculture movements, the changing roles of women, the impact of decolonization. It's been quite a journey.
It really has.
And I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so.
We've seen how the Netherlands transformed from war-torn nation into the modern pluralistic society we know today. And we've explored how the seeds of many contemporary challenges were sown during these pivotal decades.
It's a reminder that history is never really over. It continues to shape us in so many ways.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Netherlands between 1948 and 1978. If this episode sparked some thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment and let us know what resonated with you most.